Hello, this is Mr. Jones, and this is the first video for AP Chemistry. And what I want to cover before we start the notes are just some good ways to approach the work and show your work, and just some useful things that we'll be doing throughout the year. So right here, I've got these notes, which are actually on my very first page of lesson notes. And you'll see the first one says, do significant figures at the end of the problem. What that means is it's better, assuming it's the same significant figure rule, to do all the math and keep all the extra digits and then do your rounding at the very end. That's the proper way to do it. It'll keep our answers the most consistent and avoid confusion. However, there are a couple of situations where you can't do that. So take this scenario. Let's say that we had to do a multiply and a multiply and a multiply to get our answer. These are all the same rule since they're all multiplying. If there was a divide in there, same rule. In this case, just do the whole thing, keep all the extra digits till the end. But let's say we did something that was a multiply and then an add and then a multiply. Let's just say that the order of operations said you had to go in this particular pattern. These are different rules. So what you would do here is you would do the multiply and then do significant figures. You would add, do significant figures, you would multiply, and do significant figures a third time. It's a pain. Fortunately, we don't see this too often. Up here, this is what we normally deal with in this class. Okay, next, bullet point 2. It's okay if your answer is off a tiny bit. So, here's what I mean by that. Let's say that I said the answer was 52.1. We'll give it a unit grams. And let's say that you got 52.3 grams. That's fine. That's not a big deal. They're close enough. Just go with it. Don't think you got it wrong. Don't ask to go over it unless you have another question. That is fine. So now the question comes up, okay, when is an answer not acceptable? Well, here's a case in this one that would be pushing it. If you got 51.0, that's not going to work. That is unacceptable. You've made a mistake on that one. You're off too much. Now, you might be doing the entire problem correct, and maybe you're doing some weird rounding in the middle. So that does happen occasionally. But usually if you're off that much, there's some mistake, often just a typo in your calculator when you're entering numbers and such causes that. Next, the third bullet. Reading of entire chapters is required. Now, usually whatever unit we're in, like right now we're going to be chapters 1 through 3. I usually will not say, hey, everybody, you need to read such and such chapter. You're just expected to do it at some point. I recommend the weekend. So this first weekend after school starts, you don't need to worry about chapters 1 and 2 in this particular case, but chapter 3 you should read because it covers many of the fundamentals, and you should know most of it already, so you should be able to kind of just breeze through it. Now, when reading the book, a lot of people often say they find it frustrating because it's complicated, there's a lot of information, and people often say, I'm just annoyed because I don't get everything. Well, hardly anybody does. So look at it this way. You're not going to lose knowledge by reading the book. You're only going to gain some. And by reading, you'll know more than if you don't read. So just give it a read, and whatever you pick up will be useful. Okay, some other things that I want to talk about. Right here is not what I wanted to do. I don't want that. I want this. Here, I have a copy of my lecture notes with everything already filled out. And we're going to go through this in the next lesson. But I want to show you a couple of things in it. When doing problems like this one here, this here, when you show your work, this is a typical mole problem, and many of you will probably see right away it's stoichiometry. When you do this, you are welcome to do it like I did, where you do fraction after fraction after fraction. You can also do that thing, I know some students like this and some teachers teach it this way. They make a line and they go like this. And in this case, they would put that 36.8 right here, although I can't fit it, and the units, and then they would put whatever numbers here, and so on. You're welcome to do it that way too. Whatever works for you as long as it makes sense. Another thing to notice, box your answer. Oh, just do it. It makes it so much neater, makes it clean for you. It helps the grader. Please box your answer. Put entire units. Don't just say 72.9%. Say 72.9% yield, or so on. Give as much detail in your answer as possible, and of course do significant figures. Another thing to be aware of is a little bit lower, right here. If the problem is complicated, and this particular problem is not very complicated, but I use it as an example. If there are a bunch of steps, it really helps to label your steps. So what I did was I labeled this step 1, this step 2, and this step 3, which was the answer. Now this problem doesn't really need this, but it's a good starting point. What this does for you is it keeps you organized, and what it does for me is it allows me to follow your logic. So on an exam, if I'm trying to figure out how many points to give you, this helps me a lot. Often, by numbering your steps, even if you get the answer wrong, you get a couple more points than you would have gotten if you didn't number your steps. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else right now. That should do it for our initial setup.